The emergency lights flashed red across the massive dome of Zenthari Prime Station. Council Prime Administrator Velthak stood at the center of the Great Hall, his forearms shaking as he looked at the holographic display floating above them. The image showed something that made even the bravest warriors in the galaxy feel afraid. 17 star systems were burning, not from war between living beings, but from something much worse. Ancient machines that had been sleeping for thousands of years had suddenly woken up. These machines belonged to the Vrakthul Empire, a race that had died out long ago. But their war machines lived on, and now they were eating entire worlds. The machines were not just destroying planets. They were taking everything from them. Metal, rock, water, air. They consumed it all and used it to build more of themselves. 3 entire species had already been wiped out completely. Their home worlds were now empty rocks, stripped of everything that had once made them beautiful and alive. Velthak looked around the circular hall at the representatives of 12 different alien species. Each one was more advanced than humans could imagine. The Zenthari had energy weapons that could crack moons in half. The Kelphi had shields that could stop the explosion of stars. The Mordak had ships that could travel between galaxies in the blink of an eye. None of it mattered. Their best weapons barely scratched the ancient Vrakthul machines. Their greatest tactical minds had studied the problem for months and found no solution. Every time they destroyed one machine, 10 more appeared to take its place. Every time they won a battle, they lost the war a little more. "We have tried everything," Velthak said, his voice echoing through the silent hall. "Our most powerful weapons cannot stop them. Our smartest generals cannot outsmart them. Our fastest ships cannot escape them. The machines learn from every fight. They adapt to every strategy we use against them." A tall, thin alien with blue skin raised one of her 6 hands. "What about the temporal defense grid? Surely we can use time manipulation to—" "The machines exist outside normal time," Velthak interrupted. "They were built by the Vrakthul to be immune to such attacks. We have tried every advanced technique in our databases. Nothing works." The hall fell silent again. These were the most intelligent beings in the galaxy, and they were out of ideas. The Vrakthul machines were spreading, faster every day. Soon they would reach the core worlds where billions of innocent lives waited in fear. A small green alien near the back of the hall spoke up. His voice was quiet but clear. "Perhaps we are thinking about this problem the wrong way. We keep trying to use advanced technology to fight advanced technology. What if we tried something different?" Velthak's large eyes focused on the speaker. "What do you mean, Counselor Zefti?" "In our databases, we have records of many primitive species, races, that survived terrible disasters not through advanced technology but through other means: cunning, adaptability, unconventional thinking." Several of the other aliens made sounds of disapproval. The idea of asking primitive species for help seemed insulting to their advanced civilizations. But Velthak was desperate enough to listen to any idea. "Show me," he said. Zefti activated a small device and new images appeared in the air above them. They showed a small blue and green planet orbiting a yellow star. "This world is called Earth. The species there calls themselves humans. They are incredibly primitive by our standards. They still use chemical rockets to travel in space. Their weapons are barely more advanced than throwing rocks." More disapproving sounds filled the hall, but Zefti continued. "However, they have survived 5 major extinction events on their planet. Their history is full of wars where smaller, weaker forces defeated much larger and more advanced enemies. They seem to specialize in finding solutions that no one else would think of." Velthak studied the images of Earth. The planet looked peaceful and quiet. The humans seemed small and weak compared to the great races of the galaxy, but they were alive, which was more than could be said for the 3 species the Vrakthul machines had already destroyed. "You want us to ask these humans for help?" asked a warrior from the Mordak Empire. "What could they possibly know that we do not?" "Perhaps nothing," Zefti admitted, "but we have exhausted all conventional solutions. The machines will reach the core worlds within 6 months, We have nothing left to lose by trying unconventional solutions. Velthak considered this. It went against everything the Galactic Council stood for. They were the advanced civilizations. They were supposed to protect and guide primitive species, not ask them for help. But pride would not stop the Vrakthul machines from destroying everything they had built. Very well, he said finally. Send an ambassador to Earth. But do not tell them the full extent of our desperation. We do not want them to think we are completely helpless. The job of contacting Earth fell to Ambassador Kethmore, an experienced diplomat who had dealt with primitive species before. He traveled to Earth aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony of Stars, expecting to find simple people who might have some basic ideas about guerrilla warfare or hiding from superior enemies. The Harmony of Stars approached Earth's solar system carefully. The humans had primitive detection systems, but they were surprisingly widespread. Satellites orbited their planet in complex patterns, and their space stations were crude but functional. For primitives, they were remarkably organized. Kethmore's ship was detected long before it reached Earth. He received a radio transmission in several human languages, requesting identification and purpose. The directness surprised him. Most primitive species were either terrified of first contact or tried to worship his people as gods. The humans just wanted to know who he was and what he wanted. This is Ambassador Kethmore of the Galactic Council. He replied in what their databases said was called English. I come seeking an audience with your leaders on a matter of great importance. The response came from someone who identified himself as Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth Defense Force. His voice was calm and professional. Ambassador Kethmore, you are cleared to approach Earth orbit. However, you will be escorted by our security forces and your ship will be scanned. I hope you understand this is standard procedure for first contact situations. Kethmore was impressed despite himself. The humans were treating him like an equal, not a superior being. They had protocols for meeting aliens, which suggested they had thought about this possibility before. Most primitive species never imagined that other intelligent life existed until it showed up at their doorstep. The escort ships that met him were small and primitive, but they moved with precision and purpose. The humans piloting them were clearly skilled and professional. When he was brought aboard their space station, Kethmore found himself in a clean, efficient environment that reminded him more of advanced civilizations than primitive ones. Captain Morrison was a tall man with graying hair and sharp eyes. He greeted Kethmore politely, but without the awe or fear that most primitives showed. Behind him stood a woman in a different uniform, who was introduced as Lieutenant Lisa Carter, Earth's xenological specialist. Xenological specialist? Kethmore asked, surprised. You have scientists who study alien life? We've been preparing for this day for decades, Carter replied. We always assumed we would meet other intelligent species eventually. We wanted to be ready. Kethmore began to realize that these humans might be more interesting than the Council had expected. They were primitive in technology, but advanced in other ways. They thought ahead. They planned for unlikely events. They treated strangers with respect but also with caution. As he began to explain the Vrakthul threat, Kethmore watched the humans' faces carefully. He expected them to be overwhelmed by the scale of the crisis. Instead, he saw calculation and analysis. These people were already thinking about the problem, trying to understand it from every angle. When he finished his explanation, Captain Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that Kethmore would remember for the rest of his life. So let me get this straight. You have 12 advanced civilizations with technology we can barely imagine, and you can't stop some old machines? And you came to us because you think we might have some clever ideas. That is essentially correct, Kethmore admitted. Morrison smiled. It was not a kind smile. Ambassador, I think you might have come to the right place after all. 3 days after Ambassador Kethmore's arrival, Colonel Danny Brooks sat in a windowless room deep beneath the Pentagon, staring at holographic displays that showed the Vrakthul threat in detail. The images were both fascinating and terrifying. Ancient war machines the size of cities moved through space like hungry predators, consuming everything in their path. Beside him, Dr. Emma Foster tapped her fingers on the metal table as she studied the data. She was Earth's leading expert in artificial intelligence warfare, and what she saw made her more excited than afraid. "This is incredible," she said quietly. "These machines have been operating autonomously for thousands of years. The complexity of their programming must be beyond anything we've ever seen." Colonel Brooks looked at her with concern. "You sound like you admire them." "I admire the engineering," Foster replied. "But that doesn't mean I want them to destroy the galaxy. Actually, their sophistication might be their weakness. The more complex a system is, the more ways it can break down." The door to the room opened, and Admiral Frank Coleman entered. He was followed by several officers and scientists who had been briefed on the situation. The weight of what they were facing showed on everyone's faces. Earth had been invited to solve a problem that 12 advanced alien civilizations couldn't handle. "What's our assessment?" Admiral Coleman asked as he took his seat at the head of the table. Colonel Brooks activated a new display. "The aliens have been fighting this wrong from the beginning. They keep treating the Vrakthul machines like a traditional enemy fleet. Big ships, big weapons, direct confrontation. But these aren't ships with crews making decisions. They're automated systems running programs that were written thousands of years ago." Lieutenant Lisa Carter, who had been present during the first meeting with Ambassador Kethmore, added her analysis. "The machines follow patterns. They prioritize targets based on threat assessment, resource availability, and strategic value. But they're not creative. They can't adapt their core programming, only their tactics." Dr. Foster pulled up technical diagrams that showed the internal structure of the Vrakthul machines. "Look at this. The aliens have been trying to destroy the machines with brute force. Energy weapons, kinetic bombardment, even antimatter warheads. But these machines were built to survive exactly those kinds of attacks. Their armor adapts to whatever hits it." "So how do we fight something that can't be destroyed?" asked Captain Pete Collins, who commanded Earth's newest stealth reconnaissance ship. "We don't fight it," Colonel Brooks said simply. "We make it go away." The room fell silent. Everyone was used to thinking in terms of destroying enemies, not making them leave voluntarily. But as Brooks explained his preliminary assessment, the idea began to make sense. These machines were programmed to expand the Vrakthul Empire. But the Vrakthul are gone. The machines are following their orders, but they're orders that no longer make sense. They're trying to conquer the galaxy for masters who have been dead for millennia. Dr. Foster nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. And because they're machines, they can't question their orders or adapt their mission. They can only follow their programming. But what if we could change what information their programming is working with?" Admiral Coleman leaned forward. "Explain." "The machines make decisions based on data," Foster continued. "Sensor readings, resource surveys, threat assessments, strategic analysis. They're incredibly sophisticated, but they're still just computers, processing information. If we can control the information they receive, we can control their decisions." Captain Collins was beginning to understand. "You want to hack machines that are thousands of years more advanced than our technology?" "Not hack," Brooks corrected. "Influence. There's a difference. Hacking means breaking into a system and changing it directly. Influence means making the system want to do what you want it to do." The next phase of the assessment required more detailed intelligence about the Vrakthul machines. Captain Collins volunteered to take his ship, the Silent Arrow, into Vrakthul-controlled space to gather information. It was an extremely dangerous mission, but Collins was confident in his ship's stealth capabilities. The Silent Arrow was Earth's most advanced vessel, though it would seem primitive compared to Galactic Council technology. What made it special was not its weapons or speed, but its ability to hide. The ship was designed to be invisible to almost every type of sensor, using techniques that the aliens had never encountered before. Collins and his crew spent 2 weeks moving carefully through the outer edges of Vrakthul territory. What they found surprised everyone. The machines were not randomly destructive. They followed specific patterns and protocols that were clearly designed for a particular purpose. "They're not just conquering," Collins reported during a secure transmission back to Earth. "They're evaluating. Every species they encounter gets categorized according to some kind of criteria. Some get destroyed immediately. Others get studied for weeks before being eliminated. And some— He paused, checking his data again. Some get ignored completely. This information changed everything. Back on Earth, the analysis team realized that the Vrakthul machines were not simply programmed to destroy all life. They were programmed to eliminate specific types of threats while preserving things that met certain criteria. Dr. Foster worked around the clock to decode the patterns. It's like they're following a checklist, she explained to the assembled team. The machines evaluate each species they encounter against a set of predetermined standards. If a species meets certain criteria, they get destroyed. If they don't meet those criteria, they might be spared. What criteria? Admiral Coleman asked. That's what we need to figure out, Foster replied. But I think it has something to do with technological development and military capability. The machines seem to target species that might eventually become threats to the Vrakthul Empire. Lieutenant Carter raised an important point. But the Vrakthul Empire doesn't exist anymore. Why are the machines still trying to protect it? Because they're machines, Brooks answered. They don't know their creators are dead. They're still following their original orders, written thousands of years ago. As far as they're concerned, they're defending an empire that still exists. This realization led to the development of Earth's strategy. Instead of trying to destroy the machines or outfight them, the humans would convince them that their mission was complete. If the machines could be made to believe that the galaxy no longer contained any threats to the Vrakthul Empire, they might stop their expansion and return to dormancy. But executing this plan would require unprecedented cooperation between Earth and the Galactic Council. The aliens would have to trust human judgment and follow human leadership, something that went against their natural instincts. Ambassador Kethmore was initially skeptical when the human plan was presented to him. You want us to pretend to be weak and harmless while you manipulate ancient war machines that have destroyed 3 entire civilizations? Not pretend, Colonel Brooks corrected. Become, temporarily. The machines evaluate threats based on observable behavior and technological capabilities. If the galaxy's most advanced civilizations temporarily reduce their military activities and hide their most threatening technologies, the machines might conclude that the current galactic situation poses no threat to their long-dead masters. Dr. Foster added, It's like dealing with a guard dog that's still protecting a house where no one lives anymore. You don't fight the dog. You convince it that there's nothing left to guard. The plan was risky and required perfect timing. Earth would coordinate the efforts of multiple species across dozens of star systems, convincing ancient machines to change their behavior without ever directly confronting them. It was the kind of strategy that only humans would think of, because only humans would assume that the best way to win a war was to avoid fighting it entirely. As preparations began, Captain Collins prepared for another reconnaissance mission, this time deeper into Vrakthul territory. His job was to map the machine's communication networks and identify the key nodes that controlled their decision-making processes. Meanwhile, Dr. Foster and her team began developing specialized equipment that could influence the machine's sensors and communication systems without being detected. The technology was primitive compared to Galactic Council standards, but it was designed specifically for this mission. The aliens watched these preparations with a mixture of hope and doubt. They had never seen anything like the human approach to warfare. Where they used overwhelming force and advanced technology, the humans used patience, subtlety, and psychological manipulation. But as Colonel Brooks reminded everyone during the final planning session, sometimes the most primitive solution was also the most effective. The Vrakthul machines were prepared for advanced threats. They were not prepared for an enemy that refused to fight. General Rick Hayes stood in the command center aboard the orbital station New Washington, looking at the largest tactical display ever assembled. Dozens of star systems were represented by glowing dots, connected by lines that showed the movement patterns of Vrakthul machines. What made this display unique was not its size, but what it represented. For the first time in galactic history, 12 alien civilizations were following human leadership in a military operation. The plan they were about to execute went against everything the Galactic Council had ever learned about warfare. Instead of gathering massive fleets for a direct assault, the humans had convinced them to spread their forces thin across dozens of worlds. Instead of using their most powerful weapons, they were hiding them. Instead of showing strength, they were pretending to be weak. Commander Tony Miller checked his equipment one final time before boarding the transport that would take him to his target world. He was leading the first wave of what the humans called infiltration teams, though they were unlike any military unit the galaxy had ever seen. Each team consisted of only 12 people, and their weapons were not guns or bombs, but small devices that looked like ordinary maintenance equipment. "Remember," Miller told his team as they prepared for deployment, "we are not soldiers today. We are repair technicians. We fix things that are broken. The Vrakthul machines will see us as part of their normal maintenance cycle, not as threats." Lieutenant Sarah Kim, Miller's second-in-command, activated her scanner and checked the readings. "The nanoscale disruptors are functioning perfectly. To Vrakthul sensors, these will look like standard cleaning and repair drones. They'll never know we're actually introducing systematic failures into their manufacturing processes." The transport ship, borrowed from the Galactic Council, approached the Vrakthul-occupied world of Kepler-7. The planet had once been home to 3 billion Kelphi, a peaceful species known for their beautiful crystal cities. Now it was a giant factory, its surface covered with automated mining operations and manufacturing facilities that produced new war machines 24 hours a day. As they descended through the atmosphere, Miller watched through the window as Vrakthul machines moved across the surface like metal insects. Some were as large as buildings, others no bigger than cars. All of them were working with mechanical precision to strip the planet of resources and turn them into weapons. The transport landed at what had once been a Kelphi spaceport. Now it was a loading dock where newly manufactured war machines were loaded onto carrier vessels for deployment to other worlds. Miller and his team walked out among the machines, their fake maintenance equipment making them invisible to the automated security systems. "It's working," whispered Sergeant Bob Turner as they moved between towering manufacturing units. "They're treating us like we belong here." The first phase of the human plan was elegantly simple. Instead of trying to destroy the Vrakthul machines, Miller's team was going to make them less efficient. The nanoscale disruptors they planted would cause tiny problems in the manufacturing process. A gear would wear out slightly faster than normal. A sensor would give readings that were 1% less accurate. A conveyor belt would move 2% slower than optimal. None of these problems would be noticed immediately. But over time, they would compound. Production schedules would fall behind. Quality control would suffer. The machines would spend more and more resources trying to fix problems that seemed to appear randomly throughout their systems. While Miller's team worked on Kepler-7, similar operations were taking place on dozens of other worlds. Each team followed the same protocol: infiltrate the manufacturing facilities, introduce controlled inefficiencies, and disappear before the machines realized what had happened. Lieutenant Colonel Beth Adams had perhaps the most difficult assignment of all. She was working with alien resistance groups on occupied worlds, teaching them human techniques for survival under automated occupation. Her job was to turn desperate refugees into an intelligence network that could monitor Vrakthul activities across 17 star systems. On the world of New Centauri, Adams met with a group of Xanthari survivors who had been hiding in underground tunnels for months. They were afraid, hungry, and had lost hope of ever seeing their families again. But they were alive, which made them valuable assets in the human strategy. "Your enemy is a machine," Adams explained to the assembled survivors. "Machines follow patterns. They have schedules, maintenance cycles, patrol routes. If you learn these patterns, you can avoid detection and gather information at the same time." She taught them how to observe without being seen, how to communicate without being intercepted, and how to survive in a world where the slightest mistake could mean death. Most importantly, she taught them that their survival had a purpose beyond just staying alive. "Every piece of information you gather helps us understand how these machines think. she told them. Every day you stay alive is another day we can learn about their weaknesses. You are not just hiding from the enemy, you are fighting them. Meanwhile, Major Gary Wilson and Dr. Helen Carter were working on perhaps the most important part of the human strategy. Deep in a hidden laboratory on Luna, they were trying to decode the Vrakthol Central Coordination Protocols. If they could understand how the machines communicated with each other, they could potentially influence their decision-making processes on a galactic scale. The work was incredibly difficult. The Vrakthol communication system was based on technologies that were thousands of years ahead of human understanding. But Wilson and Carter had an advantage that the aliens lacked. They were not trying to understand the technology itself, only how it made decisions. "Look at this," Carter said, pointing to a pattern in the data stream they had intercepted. Every 6 hours, each manufacturing facility reports its production status to the Central Coordination Network. The reports follow a standardized format that hasn't changed in thousands of years. Wilson studied the pattern. Which means if we can duplicate the format, we can inject false reports into their communication system. We could make them think production is going better or worse than it actually is. This discovery opened up new possibilities for the human strategy. If they could manipulate the information flowing between Vrakthol facilities, they could create confusion and inefficiency on a scale that no direct military attack could achieve. Captain Kevin Turner's engineering corps began implementing the second phase of the plan. Working from carefully hidden bases throughout Vrakthol territory, they began introducing subtle changes to the raw materials being fed into the manufacturing systems. The changes were so small that they would not be detected by automated quality control systems, but they would cause cascade failures in the finished products. "We're not poisoning their supply chain," Turner explained to his team. "We're giving it indigestion. The machines will still function, but they'll be unreliable. A targeting system will be slightly less accurate. A power core will run 10% less efficiently. A hull plate will be marginally weaker than specifications." The beauty of this approach was that the problems would appear to be random manufacturing defects, rather than enemy sabotage. The Vrakthol machines would waste enormous amounts of resources trying to identify and fix problems that seemed to have no pattern or cause. As the human strategy unfolded across multiple star systems, the aliens watched with a mixture of amazement and confusion. They were used to warfare that involved massive fleets, powerful weapons, and decisive battles. The human approach seemed almost invisible by comparison. Ambassador Kethmore observed the operations from the command center and struggled to understand what he was seeing. "Your forces are not engaging the enemy directly," he said to General Hayes. "How can you win a war without fighting battles?" Hayes smiled and gestured to the tactical display. "Ambassador, we are fighting battles, thousands of them. But we're fighting them inside the enemy's decision-making process, not in space. Every time one of their machines has to spend extra resources fixing a problem we created, that's a victory. Every time their production schedule falls behind because of our sabotage, that's a victory. Every time they make a wrong decision because we gave them false information, that's a victory." The results began to show within weeks. Vrakthol production rates started declining across multiple worlds. New war machines began displaying performance problems that their creators had never anticipated. Most importantly, the machines began showing signs of confusion as their normally precise operations became increasingly chaotic. Dr. Carter monitored the intercepted communications and reported the first major breakthrough. "They're starting to question their own data," she announced during a briefing. "The Central Coordination Network is receiving conflicting reports from different facilities. Some are reporting record production levels, while others are reporting system failures. The machines don't know which information to trust." This was exactly what the humans had hoped for. By introducing uncertainty into the Vrakthol information systems, they were forcing the machines to spend resources on analysis and verification instead of conquest and expansion. Admiral Ryan Cooper stood on the bridge of the command ship Defiant, watching something that no one in the galaxy had ever seen before. On the main screen, massive Vrakthol manufacturing complexes were shutting down one by one. Giant machines that had been working without rest for months were suddenly going silent. Production lines that had churned out war machines day and night were grinding to a halt. "Sir, we're receiving reports from all sectors," announced Lieutenant Jennifer Walsh, the communications officer. Vrakthul facilities across 17 star systems are experiencing simultaneous system failures, but the pattern is too widespread to be coincidental. Cooper nodded grimly. He had been watching the human plan unfold for weeks, and he was still amazed by its effectiveness. The humans had not fired a single shot in anger, yet they were achieving what the combined fleets of 12 advanced civilizations could not accomplish through direct warfare. On the surface of the planet below, Commander Julie Parker crouched in the shadow of a massive Vrakthul control tower. Her mission was perhaps the most dangerous of the entire operation. She and her team were about to plant human-designed logic bombs directly into the central command network of the ancient machines. "Remember," she whispered to her team through their communication devices, "these are not weapons in the traditional sense. We are not trying to destroy their computer systems. We are trying to change how they think." Sergeant Mike Davis checked his equipment one more time. The logic bombs looked like ordinary data storage devices, small enough to fit in his pocket. But they contained some of the most sophisticated programming ever created by human minds. Instead of destroying the Vrakthul computers, they would gradually alter the way those computers made decisions. "How exactly do these things work?" asked Private Lisa Green, the newest member of the team. Dr. Sam Miller, who had helped design the logic bombs, explained in simple terms. "Imagine you have a calculator that always gives you the right answer, but someone secretly changes one small part of its programming. Now, instead of adding 2 plus 2 and getting 4, it occasionally gets 3.99. The difference is tiny, but over time, all your calculations become wrong." Parker's team moved carefully through the Vrakthul facility, avoiding the automated security patrols that moved through the corridors like mechanical ghosts. The logic bombs had to be planted in specific locations within the central processing units, close enough to the main data streams to influence decision-making, but hidden enough to avoid detection. The work was slow and dangerous. One mistake would trigger alarms that would bring hundreds of war machines down on their heads. But the humans had trained for this mission for months, studying every detail of Vrakthul computer architecture and learning to move through their facilities like they belonged there. As Parker's team worked inside the command center, the effects of previous human operations were becoming visible throughout the galaxy. Dr. Sam Green, monitoring the situation from his analysis station on Luna, watched with satisfaction as his predictions began to come true. "The cascade failures are accelerating," he reported to the Joint Command Staff. "The inefficiencies we introduced into their manufacturing processes 3 weeks ago are now causing resource shortages across multiple sectors. The machines are having to choose between maintaining production schedules and maintaining quality standards. But the most important effect was psychological, if machines could be said to have psychology. The Vrakthul systems were designed to operate with perfect efficiency and complete information. They had never been programmed to deal with uncertainty, conflicting data, or systematic failures that had no apparent cause. Colonel Matt Davis, watching from his command post on the outer rim of Vrakthul territory, saw the first signs that the machines were beginning to turn on each other. "Sir, you need to see this," he called to Admiral Cooper over the communication link. "Two Vrakthul manufacturing facilities in the Kepler system are fighting over the same mineral deposits. They're actually shooting at each other." This was exactly what the humans had hoped would happen. By manipulating the resource allocation data that the machines used to make decisions, they had triggered dormant competition protocols that had been built into the Vrakthul systems thousands of years ago. The machines were designed to compete for resources when shortages occurred, but they had never experienced artificial shortages before. As the competition between different Vrakthul facilities intensified, their overall efficiency dropped even further. Machines that should have been working together to expand the ancient empire were instead wasting energy and materials fighting each other for resources that were becoming increasingly scarce due to human sabotage. Major Crystal Johnson and her Psychological warfare specialists were preparing to implement the final phase of the human strategy. Working from a hidden base in the asteroid belt, they had spent weeks studying Vrakthul communication patterns and learning to mimic their data transmission protocols. The beauty of this operation, Johnson explained to her team, is that we are going to convince the machines that they are succeeding beyond their wildest dreams. We are going to flood their communication networks with reports of successful resistance movements on dozens of worlds. The logic was brilliant in its simplicity. The Vrakthul machines were programmed to respond to threats with overwhelming force. If they believed that strong resistance movements were emerging on multiple worlds simultaneously, they would be forced to spread their forces thin to deal with all the threats. But the resistance movements existed only in the false reports that Johnson's team was preparing to broadcast. Sergeant Paul Williams, one of Johnson's communications specialists, worked on creating realistic battle reports that would convince the ancient machines that they were facing coordinated opposition across the galaxy. "How detailed do these reports need to be?" he asked. "Very detailed," Johnson replied. "These machines have been analyzing military data for thousands of years. They will be suspicious of anything that seems too simple or too convenient. We need to create reports that look like real intelligence gathered by real scouts about real battles." The false intelligence operation required enormous coordination between human teams and alien resistance groups throughout Vrakthul territory. Lieutenant Colonel Beth Adams worked with her network of survivors to provide authentic background, details that would make the fake reports believable. "We need real locations, real unit designations, real tactical situations," Adams explained to a group of Zenthari resistance leaders. "The machines will check every detail against their own databases. If anything seems wrong, they will realize they are being deceived." As Johnson's team prepared to broadcast their false intelligence, the logic bombs that Commander Parker had planted began to take effect. The Vrakthul Central Command Network started making subtle errors in its resource allocation decisions. Manufacturing facilities received incorrect priority assignments. War machines were deployed to defend targets that were not actually under threat. Most importantly, the system began to overestimate the level of resistance it was facing throughout the galaxy. Dr. Helen Carter, monitoring the intercepted communications from her laboratory on Luna, was the first to notice the change. "The machines are starting to panic," she announced during an emergency briefing. "Their decision-making patterns are becoming increasingly erratic. They are responding to threats that do not exist and ignoring actual strategic priorities." The culmination of the human strategy came when Major Johnson's team began broadcasting their false intelligence reports. The reports described coordinated attacks on Vrakthul facilities, successful sabotage operations, and growing resistance movements on dozens of worlds. Each report was carefully crafted to seem authentic, while describing events that existed only in human imagination. Captain Alex Rodriguez, monitoring Vrakthul fleet movements from his observation post, watched as the ancient war machines began to respond exactly as the humans had predicted. "They are taking the bait," he reported. "Vrakthul fleets are moving to respond to threats that exist only on paper. They are spreading themselves across hundreds of star systems, chasing shadows." The machines were programmed to be thorough and methodical in their response to threats. When they received reports of resistance activity, they deployed overwhelming force to eliminate it completely. But the resistance movements they were chasing did not exist, which meant their overwhelming force was being wasted on empty space and abandoned worlds. Admiral Cooper watched the tactical display as Vrakthul forces spread themselves thinner and thinner across the galaxy. "How long can we maintain this deception?" he asked. Dr. Carter checked her analysis of the machine communication patterns. "Not much longer. The machines will eventually realize that they are not actually encountering the resistance forces described in the reports. But by then, they should be so overextended and confused that they will be forced to make a strategic decision about their overall mission." That strategic decision was exactly what the humans were waiting for. The Vrakthul machines had been programmed to expand the ancient empire and eliminate threats to its dominance. Captain Alex Thompson stood on the observation deck of the scout ship Horizon, watching something that would be remembered for thousands of years. Across the star system, massive Vrakthul war machines were methodically dismantling their own manufacturing facilities. The ancient fleets that had terrorized the galaxy for months were packing up and preparing to leave. "I still can't believe it's working," said Lieutenant Commander Sarah Ross, who stood beside him watching the incredible sight. "They're actually going away voluntarily." Thompson smiled as he watched a city-sized Vrakthul factory ship carefully disassemble a orbital construction platform. The machines were being as thorough in their withdrawal as they had been in their conquest. Every piece of equipment was being recovered and stored. Every resource was being reclaimed. They were leaving nothing behind that could be useful to potential enemies. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from Admiral Foster," announced the communications officer. "She wants all observation teams to maintain their positions and continue recording. This is historic." Admiral Karen Foster was indeed making history. She had been chosen to address the Galactic Council Assembly when the withdrawal was complete, explaining how humanity had achieved what 12 advanced civilizations could not. But first she wanted to make sure they understood exactly what had happened and why it worked. From her flagship, the New Horizon, Foster watched as Vrakthul fleets gathered at the edge of each star system they had occupied. The machines moved, with the same mechanical precision they had shown during their conquest. But now they were using that precision to organize their departure. "Admiral, we're detecting massive energy readings from the Vrakthul fleet positions," reported Commander Joe Mitchell from the sensor station. "They appear to be opening some kind of hyperspace corridors." Foster nodded. The humans had theorized that the Vrakthul machines possessed technology for traveling between galaxies, but this was the first time anyone had seen it in action. The energy signatures were unlike anything in the Galactic Council's databases. These machines were preparing to leave not just the local star systems, but possibly the entire galaxy. Dr. Lucy Martin, who had been monitoring Vrakthul communications throughout the operation, confirmed what everyone was hoping to hear. The machines are broadcasting their final status reports. According to their analysis, this galactic region has become unsuitable for empire expansion due to hostile conditions and coordinated resistance. They are implementing Protocol 7, withdrawal and relocation to alternative operational areas. Protocol 7 had been built into Vrakthul programming thousands of years ago, but it had never been used. The ancient creators of these machines had been wise enough to include instructions for withdrawal if expansion became impossible. The humans had simply created conditions that made the machines believe withdrawal was necessary. Back on Earth, Colonel Danny Brooks watched the withdrawal from the command center beneath the Pentagon. The man who had first proposed treating the machines as a problem to be solved rather than an enemy to be destroyed was quietly satisfied with the results. "The interesting thing," he said to Dr. Emma Foster, who stood beside him, "is that we never actually lied to them. Everything we made them believe was technically true from a certain point of view." Dr. Foster nodded. "The galaxy did become hostile to their expansion because we made it hostile. Resistance movements were coordinating against them because we were coordinating them. Their manufacturing systems were failing because we were making them fail. We just helped them reach the logical conclusion of their own analysis." As the last Vrakthul fleet prepared to depart, Captain Tim Kelly began coordinating the massive reconstruction effort that would be needed across 17 star systems. The machines had stripped entire worlds of resources, leaving behind populations that needed immediate humanitarian aid. "The good news," Kelly reported to the Joint Command Staff, "is that the machines were very efficient in their resource extraction. They didn't destroy anything unnecessarily. Most of the planetary infrastructure can be rebuilt relatively quickly." Lieutenant Commander Nicole Gray, who had been working with alien refugee populations throughout the crisis, was already organizing relief efforts. "The survivors are in remarkably good condition considering what they've been through. The humans who taught them survival techniques did excellent work. These people are ready to rebuild their worlds." But perhaps the most important outcome of the entire operation was not the defeat of the Vrakthul machines, but the new relationships that had been formed between humanity and the Galactic Council. Ambassador Kethmore, who had initially come to Earth expecting to find primitive barbarians, now found himself dealing with strategic thinkers who had accomplished the impossible. I must admit, Kethmore said during a final briefing aboard the Harmony of Stars. When the Council decided to contact your species, we expected you to provide simple tactics or guerrilla warfare techniques. We never imagined you would solve the problem in a way that none of us had even considered. General Rick Hayes, who had coordinated the entire operation, tried to explain the human approach in terms the aliens could understand. The key was recognizing that this wasn't really a military problem at all. It was an engineering problem. The machines were following their programming perfectly. We just had to change the inputs to their programming so they would reach different conclusions. Dr. Helen Carter added her analysis. The Vrakthul machines were incredibly sophisticated, but sophistication can be a weakness. The more complex a system is, the more ways there are to influence its behavior. Simple systems are harder to fool because they have fewer variables to manipulate. As the final Vrakthul fleet disappeared into hyperspace, heading for distant galaxies, the scope of the human achievement became clear. They had not just saved the current galactic civilization. They had eliminated a threat that could have returned again and again for thousands of years. Major Steve Parker, who had been part of the original assessment team, reflected on the lessons learned. The machines will probably find another galaxy to expand into, but they'll also remember what happened here. They've learned that galaxies can become unsuitable for expansion. That knowledge might make them more cautious in the future. The celebration that followed the Vrakthul withdrawal was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. 12 different species, each with their own traditions and customs, came together to honor the humans who had saved them all. But the humans were not interested in praise or recognition. They were already thinking about the next problem that might need solving. Ambassador Kethmore's final report to the Galactic Council was a masterpiece of diplomatic understatement. He wrote that the Council's decision to contact Earth had been surprisingly successful, and that humans showed considerable potential as strategic advisors. What he really meant was that humanity had demonstrated capabilities that redefined what the Council thought was possible. The formal ceremony welcoming Earth to the Galactic Council took place on Zinthari Prime, in the same hall where the emergency session had been called months earlier. But this time, the mood was celebration rather than desperation. The representatives of 12 species stood to applaud as the human delegation entered. Admiral Karen Foster, representing Earth, addressed the assembly with characteristic human directness. We are honored to join the Galactic Council, but we want to be clear about our role. We are not here to lead or to dominate. We are here to help solve problems that seem impossible. She paused and looked around the Great Hall. Every species here has capabilities that others lack. Your energy weapons, your shields, your faster-than-light travel, your advanced manufacturing. These technologies are amazing, and we have much to learn from you. But sometimes the solution to a problem is not more advanced technology. Sometimes it is thinking about the problem in a completely different way. Council Prime Administrator Velthak, who had authorized the desperate mission to Earth, stood to respond. The Council has learned much from this experience. We learned that our assumptions about primitive species were wrong. We learned that advanced technology is not always the answer to every problem. Most importantly, we learned that sometimes the best help comes from the most unexpected sources. As the ceremony concluded, and the human delegation prepared to return to Earth, Lieutenant Commander Nicole Gray found herself thinking about how much had changed in just a few months. Humanity had gone from being an unknown species on the edge of the galaxy to being the problem solvers that advanced civilizations called when conventional solutions failed. The Harmony of Stars departed Earth orbit with a full diplomatic mission and a dozen human advisors who would help establish permanent relations with the Galactic Council. But more importantly, it carried with it a new understanding of what it meant to ask for help. The Council had thought they were asking the wrong species for help because humans seemed too primitive to offer useful solutions. Instead, they had discovered that being primitive was exactly what made humans the right species to ask. Sometimes the most advanced solution is to think like someone who has never been told that certain things are impossible.